If I had known that room 304 would hold the greatest regret and, at the same time, the only living memory of happiness in my life, perhaps I would have turned around in that university hallway and gone back to my parents' house in the Midwest. But fate has a cruel and delicious way of playing tricks on us, placing temptation exactly where we swore not to look. Before I tell you how I lost and rediscovered the love of my life, make sure to follow the Forbidden Romances channel so you don't miss a single detail of this story. My name is Erica. I am 40 years old today, but I need you to go back with me to the year 2004. When I was just a girl of 20, thin, covered in freckles, wearing baggy clothes to hide my body, and carrying a heavy suitcase without wheels that weighed as much as my responsibility of being the first in my family to get into medical school at a prestigious university in the Northeast. The dorm hallway smelled of old floor wax and cheap pine cleaner, an odor that stuck in my throat and increased the nausea from my nerves. I had traveled 6 hours by Greyhound bus from my small rural town to the big city, clutching my purse against my chest as if someone would steal my few belongings at any moment. My mother had sewn a secret pocket into my jeans for me to keep the money for the first month, and I felt the crumpled bills brushing against my skin with every step. I felt like an imposter in that place, an intruder in the world of doctors, asking permission just to exist in a space that clearly hadn't been designed for someone like me. When I finally found the peeling wooden door with the number of my room, I had to drop my suitcase on the floor to dry my sweaty hands on my pants before turning the knob. The silence of the hallway seemed to mock my anxiety, and I said a brief mental prayer, asking God that my roommate would be a quiet, studious person, and preferably as invisible as I wished to be. I didn't want friends. I didn't want parties. I just needed a corner to study anatomy and maintain my full scholarship, because any low grade would mean the end of my dream and the shame of my family. I pushed the door open with my shoulder, and the first thing I saw was the stark contrast between the two sides of the small square room. The left side, which seemed to be mine, had only a bare mattress with blue stripes and a cold, impersonal desk. The right side, however, was an explosion of colors, fabrics, and life that seemed to vibrate even with no one there. There was a bohemian tapestry over the bed, posters of rock bands taped to the wall, and a pile of fashion magazines tossed carelessly on the chair, as if the owner didn't have the slightest concern for order or the money those things cost. I took 2 steps inside, dragging my heavy suitcase, and the sound of the leather scraping on the floor sounded like thunder in that silence. I stood paralyzed in the middle of the room, feeling small before that expansive personality that already dominated the environment before I even met the owner. The scent coming from her side was sweet, a mix of vanilla and some expensive perfume I would never have the courage to walk into a Sephora to ask the price of. That intimidated me more than any medical book, for it was the scent of someone who belonged to the world, while I smelled of unscented soap and fear. I began to unpack my suitcase in silence, folding my worn cotton t-shirts and organizing my books on the shelf with surgical precision, trying to take up as little space as possible. I placed the wooden rosary my grandmother gave me under my pillow, my amulet against evil, unaware that the danger I would face was not spiritual, but purely physical and emotional. I was finishing straightening my white sheets, brought from home, when I heard loud laughter and firm footsteps coming down the hall, growing in volume until they stopped exactly at my door. The door swung open with a bang, hitting the wall behind it, and it was as if the sun had decided to rise inside that damp room at 3 p.m. Fabi walked in carrying 3 shopping bags from the mall in one hand and a key with a huge fuzzy keychain in the other, laughing at something someone had said outside. She stopped abruptly upon seeing me, and that second of silence was the exact time it took for me to memorize every detail of the face that would haunt me for the next 2 decades. She was everything I was not, and everything my upbringing taught me to avoid. Exuberant, loud, and undeniably magnetic. Fabi had the tanned skin of someone who spent weekends at the Hamptons, not studying in a dark room. Her brown hair fell in perfect waves with golden highlights over her shoulders, and her bright eyes sparkled with a playful mischief. She wore a camisole that left her arms bare, and tight jeans that showed curves I didn't even know were allowed in an academic environment. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know the little ghost had already arrived," she exclaimed, tossing her bags onto her bed with fascinating indifference and coming toward me with her hand extended. "I'm Fabiana, but everyone calls me Fabi. You must be Erica, right?" The coordinator told me I was going to share a room with the smartest girl in the freshman class. I shook her hand, feeling her soft, warm skin against my cold, trembling hand, and stuttered a "nice to meet you" that barely left my throat. She didn't seem to notice my discomfort, or if she did, she chose to ignore it, as she continued talking about the city traffic, about how tiny the room was, and how we urgently needed to get a mini fridge in there for some beers. I just nodded, hypnotized by the movement of her mouth and the way she tossed her hair back every 3 sentences. In that first hour, as she organized her colorful clothes in the closet next to my gray and black pieces, I realized the social abyss that separated us. Fabi talked about trips to Europe during spring break, like she was talking about going to the grocery store, while I mentally calculated if my meal plan money would last until the end of the month. She was there to live the college experience. I was there to survive and change the destiny of my family. They were worlds that shouldn't touch, orbits that should never cross. However, when night fell and we turned off the main light, leaving only the yellow glow of her lamp, I felt a strange intimacy settle in the dark. Lying on my hard bed, turned toward the wall so I wouldn't have to face the intimacy of that stranger, I could hear her breathing, rhythmic and peaceful, from the other side of the room. The vanilla perfume invaded my side of the territory, ignoring the invisible borders I tried to build. I closed my eyes tight, clutching the rosary under my pillow until my fingers ached, trying to focus on my usual prayers. But for the first time in my life, the words of the Hail Mary mixed with the image of my roommate's open smile and the sound of that raspy laugh. I didn't know it. But at that moment, in the silence of that dorm, the first crack in my good girl armor had just been made, and I was about to discover that no prayer would protect me from what I was beginning to feel. The following months ran like fine sand through my fingers, mixing the rigidity of my studies with the colorful chaos that Fabiana's presence brought to my life. That tiny room transformed into a bubble outside of time, where the laws of physics and morality I knew didn't seem to apply with the same force. I spent the day at the library, buried in histology and biochemistry books, trying to keep my mind busy with cells and molecules. But it was at night, when the key turned in the lock, that my true test of endurance began. A routine established itself in a dangerously domestic way. She would arrive from practice or parties, always bringing the smell of the wind and the street with her, and invade my silence with funny stories and complaints about professors I didn't even know. I tried to maintain an invisible barrier, responding with one-word answers and keeping my eyes fixed on my notes. But Fabiana had the gift of tearing down walls without using a single hammer. She would sit on the edge of my bed without asking permission, steal pieces of my crackers, and make me laugh at silly jokes until my stomach hurt. Slowly, my side of the room, once sterile and gray, began to gain color with the gifts she gave me. A funny mug, a soft pillow, a picture frame that was still empty. I accepted those peace offerings with a mix of gratitude and panic, feeling that with every gesture of affection, she tied another rope around my chest. The late-night study sessions became our sacred and profane ritual. While the rest of the dorm slept, the two of us stayed awake under the yellow light of the lamps, me memorizing the names of bones and her sketching fashion designs in her notebooks. The silence of those dead hours created an intimacy that made me dizzy. The sound of her breathing 2 yards away from me seemed louder than any music. Sometimes, she would sigh from boredom and stretch her legs, her bare feet accidentally brushing against my chair, and that subtle touch sent an electric current down my spine that made me completely lose my train of thought. I felt like a sinner observing a fallen angel. While I studied human anatomy in the cold, glossy pages of the atlas, my eyes insisted on drifting to the real, living anatomy stretching on the bed next to me. I watched under my eyelashes the curve of her neck when she tied her hair, the way her tank top fell over her tanned shoulders, and the distracted way she bit the end of her pen. They were mundane details for anyone else, but for me, raised under the rigidity of dogma and guilt. It was the most tempting and terrifying sight in the world. The tension reached an unbearable point on a stifling November night. Close to finals, I had the non-negotiable habit of praying the rosary every night before bed, kneeling beside the bed, seeking in the repetition of the prayers the strength not to succumb to the impure thoughts haunting my mind. I was in the middle of the second decade, with my eyes closed and my knees aching on the hard floor, whispering the sacred words like a shield, when I heard the sound of her jean zipper being undone. My heart raced, thumping against the seams of my flannel pajamas. I knew she was just changing clothes to sleep, a banal act that happened every night. But that night the air felt thicker, charged with static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried to focus on the prayer, clutching the wooden beads tightly, but the sound of the fabric sliding over her skin was deafening. I opened my eyes for a second, betrayed by my own curiosity, and saw her silhouette against the lamplight, taking off her shirt with a naturalness that made me forget how to breathe. Guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. I closed my eyes again, asking God for forgiveness for coveting what wasn't mine, for feeling that heat rising through my face and settling in my womb. I felt dirty for desiring my only friend, the only person who saw me beyond my baggy clothes and thick glasses. Fabiana had no idea of the turmoil she caused in me. To her, I was just Erica, the studious religious girl from the country. Her innocence made it even more painful because I knew I was deceiving the person who trusted me most. "Erica, are you done praying yet?" Her voice sounded raspy in the silence, cutting through my penance. I stood up quickly, hiding the rosary under my pillow as if it were a murder weapon, and murmured a trembling "yes," without the courage to face her. I lay in bed and pulled the sheet up to my chin, turning my back to her, feeling my face burn with shame. I expected her to turn off the light, but I felt the mattress of my bed sink with the weight of her sitting on the edge. "You're too tense about finals, girl. You need to relax a bit," she said, and I felt her hand rest on my shoulder, a warm, firm touch through the sheet. "Your muscles are hard as rocks." Her touch burned my skin, and I had to bite my lip to keep from letting out a sigh that would give everything away. I wanted to scream for her to take her hand off, for her to move away and leave me safe in my loneliness. But at the same time, I desperately wanted to turn and hug her, bury my face in her neck and forget who I was supposed to be. "I'm fine, Fabi. Just tired," I lied, my voice coming out thin and strained. She gave my shoulder a brief squeeze, a gesture of comfort that for me was a delicious torture, and stood up. "Tomorrow is the end of the semester party. You're coming with me, even if I have to drag you by your hair. No more books for one night, Erica. You need to live." When she turned off the light and the room plunged into darkness, I stayed with my eyes open, staring at the invisible ceiling. Her scent permeated the air, and the promise of the party hung over us like a sentence. I knew, with terrifying certainty, that my resistance was hanging by a thread. That barrier I built with prayers and silences was about to crumble, and I was terrified of what I would find in the rubble if I allowed myself, for just one night, to be just a woman and not a saint. Never underestimate the power of eyeliner and a borrowed silk blouse to change the axis of your world, especially when the hands applying the makeup are the same ones you try to avoid in your most secret dreams. That Friday night had all the makings of just another college event fueled by cheap drinks and deafening music. But the preparation ritual in our room transformed those four walls into an emotional torture chamber I had no desire to escape. I was sitting in the swivel chair, my body stiff as a statue, while Fabiana orbited around me with the determination of an artist about to finish her masterpiece. "Stop frowning, Erica, or the foundation is going to crack," she scolded, holding my chin firmly between her thumb and index finger. Her touch on my skin was warm and possessive, and I had to hold my breath so I wouldn't tremble. She was dangerously close, leaning over me, and I could count her eyelashes and smell the mint gum she was chewing. My peripheral vision was full of her presence, and every time she leaned in to put mascara on my eyes, I felt a vertigo that had nothing to do with balance. I had spent the last hour trying to convince her that I should stay in the room studying to get ahead, but Fabiana had irrefutable arguments and a pout that broke any resistance. She insisted that I couldn't wear my usual clothes, those baggy t-shirts that served as a shield against the world, and forced me to wear one of her favorite blouses. It was a piece of black fabric, soft to the touch, with a neckline I considered scandalous, but she swore was just modern. Feeling that fabric on my skin was like wearing her very essence, and it made me feel naked and protected at the same time. "Open your eyes," she ordered softly. When I obeyed, I found her face just a few inches from mine. The smile she gave me was one of pure satisfaction, not mockery. And for the first time in months, she didn't look at me as the nerdy friend, but with a curiosity that made my stomach flip. She brushed a strand of my hair that had fallen on my forehead and tucked it behind my ear, her fingers brushing the sensitive skin of my neck, lingering there a second longer than necessary. That touch burned like an ember, and I saw her pupils dilate slightly. "You're beautiful, Erica," she whispered, and the huskiness in her voice made the air leave my lungs. "You just hide too much. Why do you hide so much?" The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. I wanted to answer that I hid because I was afraid of being seen, afraid that if someone looked too closely, they would see the stain of sin I carried in my soul just for wanting her. But my voice died in my throat, choked by the proximity of her lips. For a terrifying moment, I thought she was going to lean in and end the distance between us right there, under the yellow light of the lamp. The moment was broken by the shrill ring of her cell phone vibrating on the nightstand. Fabiana pulled away with a sigh that sounded like frustration, and the cold that took the place of her body heat made me feel an immediate void. She answered laughing, returning to the extroverted Fabiana she always was, coordinating a meeting spot with other friends, while I turned to the mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. The red lipstick, the marked eyes, the loose hair. That wasn't the country girl who prayed the rosary. It was a woman ready to make mistakes. We left the dorm, leaving a trail of perfume in the hallway. The walk to the party, which was held at the campus gym, was made under a light drizzle that left the asphalt shiny like a black mirror. I walked trying to pull the blouse up, uncomfortable with the cold wind on my exposed skin. But Fabiana hooked her arm in mine, pulling me close to her so we could share the umbrella. The contact of her body against my hip with every step was a constant reminder that I was walking into the lion's den of my own free will. As we approached, the bass of the electronic music began to vibrate in my chest, syncing with the racing beat of my heart. There were groups of students laughing, drinking from plastic cups, and hugging, a mass of bodies and hormones that left me in a panic. I stopped at the entrance, feeling the instinct to flee screaming in my legs. This wasn't my world. I should be in my room, safe with my books and my prayers. "Hey." Fabiana squeezed my arm, noticing my hesitation. She stepped in front of me, blocking the view of the crowd, creating a cocoon of safety just for the two of us. "You're not alone. I'm here. If it gets too bad, we'll leave and order a pizza. I promise." She held out her hand to me, palm open, a silent invitation to trust her. I looked at that hand, at the silver rings she wore, and then at her eyes, which shone with the promise of fun and care. I took a deep breath, swallowing the fear and the morality that kept me pinned to the ground, and interlaced my fingers with hers. Her hand was firm, anchoring my existence in that chaos. At that moment, as we crossed the gym doors and were swallowed by the loud music and strobe lights, I didn't know if I was being saved or condemned. The only certainty I had was that as long as she held my hand, I would go to hell with her. And little did I know that hell, that night, would taste sweet and unforgettable. The university gym had ceased to be a place for sports and become a greenhouse of sweaty bodies, flashing lights, and bass that made the floor shake under our feet. As soon as we stepped through the door, the human heat hit me like a physical wave, carrying the unmistakable scent of cheap beer, sweet perfume, and raw hormones. In any other situation, my survival instinct would have made me turn around and run to the silence of my room. But Fabiana's hand still held mine firmly, guiding me through that sea of strangers, like she was Moses parting the Red Sea. I felt like an intruder in a pagan ritual, squinting against the strobe light flashes that turned people's movements into a sequence of frozen, bizarre frames. Fabiana, on the other hand, seemed to be in her natural habitat, greeting people I had never seen in my life with wide smiles and enthusiastic waves, never letting go of my hand. She dragged me to the makeshift bar, where students from the athletic department served mixtures of questionable colors in clear plastic cups. I tried to refuse, babbling something about having an early class the next day, even though it was Friday, but she just laughed and put a cold cup in my hand, saying it was just juice with a kick, and that I needed to baptize my new self tonight. I took the first sip warily, expecting the bitter taste of alcohol my mother always condemned, but I was surprised by a sweet, fruity flavor that dangerously masked the alcohol content of that mix. The liquid went down cold through my throat and exploded into a comforting warmth in my stomach, sending an immediate message to my brain that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a sin to relax my shoulders for a few hours. Fabiana toasted her cup against mine with a plastic click, winked, and downed half the drink at once, silently challenging me to join her in that descent into the unknown. As the second cup emptied, the rigidity that locked my spine began to dissolve, replaced by a strange and pleasant lightness. The lights, once aggressive, now seemed to paint Fabiana's face with magical colors, alternating between deep blue and intense red, making her look like a creature from another world. The music stopped being just noise and began to dictate the rhythm of my breathing and my heart, which beat in sync with the bass from the speakers. I found myself laughing at things I didn't understand, swaying my head to the beat, and feeling that, for the first time, I wasn't the invisible girl in the back of the class. That's when the music changed to a slower, more engaging rhythm, one of those classic rock ballads that everyone knew the words to, and the dynamic between us changed irreversibly. The crowd around us pressed in, pushing us against each other, and the personal space I always prized ceased to exist. Fabiana didn't pull back. On the contrary, she put her arms around my waist to protect me from the shoves, pressing her back against some stranger's chest to create a safe barrier for me. Suddenly, we were face to face, just millimeters apart, trapped in our own private bubble in the middle of the chaos. I could feel the heat of her skin radiating through her thin blouse, burning my own skin where our bodies touched. Her hands on my waist were firm, possessive, and her thumbs drew lazy circles on the fabric of my clothes, a touch that sent electric shivers to places I didn't even know had sensitivity. I lifted my face to look at her, and the height of her heels left her slightly above me, forcing me to stare into those clear eyes that seemed to devour every piece of my soul. "Are you having fun, Erica?" she asked, but the music was so loud she had to lean in and speak directly into my ear. Her warm breath hit my neck, mixed with the smell of the sweet drink and that vanilla perfume that now seemed to be ingrained in my pores. My knees weakened, and I had to hold onto her shoulders to keep my balance, feeling the soft texture of her bare arms under my fingers. "I am," I answered, shouting back, but my voice came out raspy and strange. I wasn't just having fun. I was in a trance. The alcohol had flipped the switch of my religious guilt, leaving only pure, raw instinct in charge. I looked at her mouth, seeing the shimmer of her lip gloss reflecting the stage lights, and I felt an insane, terrifying urge to know what she tasted like. It was a forbidden thought, a mortal sin being committed right there in the middle of 300 people, but I couldn't look away. Fabiana noticed. I saw the exact moment her expression changed from fun to something deeper and darker. She stopped singing the song, stopped smiling at the people around us, and focused all her attention on my mouth. Her hand moved from my waist to the back of my neck, her fingers tangling in my loose hair, pulling my head back slightly, The world around us, the music, the shouting, the smell of sweat, disappeared completely, leaving only the racing pulse at the base of her neck, which I could see beating frantically. "Let's get out of here," she said, not as a question, but as an urgent statement. Her voice no longer had that playful tone. It was deep, charged with a tension that made my stomach contract. She didn't wait for my answer. She interlaced her fingers with mine with a force that almost hurt and began to clear a path to the exit, pulling me along. I went. I left my fears at the door, along with my shoes, and followed her into the darkness of the right side of the room, knowing that when the sun rose, nothing in my world would be in the same place. We left the gym stumbling, laughing for no apparent reason, leaning on each other as if gravity had decided to work differently for the two of us. The cold night air hit my flushed face, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire burning inside me. The walk back to the dorm seemed both endless and too short. I walked with my head resting on her shoulder, smelling her skin, intoxicated not just by the drink, but by the silent promise of what would happen when that door closed. I knew I was walking toward the abyss, but for the first time in 20 years, I didn't want to be saved. The third-floor hallway was plunged into a deathly silence that contrasted violently with the buzzing still echoing in my ears. With every stumbling step we took on the worn floor, I felt we were moving away from reality and entering a dimension where the rules of the world outside ceased to exist. Fabiana hadn't let go of my waist for a single second during the walk. On the contrary, the weight of her arm on my shoulders seemed to have doubled, and she leaned on me with blind trust, laughing softly at jokes that only existed in her head. The heat of her body burned through the thin fabric of my borrowed blouse, a fever that had nothing to do with the flu, and everything to do with the desire I had been trying to suppress for months. We reached room 304, and the ritual of finding the key in her purse became a Herculean and unnecessarily intimate task. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the proximity of her face, which was resting on my shoulder while she waited. I felt her warm breath hit my neck, rhythmic and heavy, carrying the sweet scent of the cheap drink mixed with that vanilla perfume that was my private undoing. When I finally managed to fit the metal into the lock and turn it, the sound of the latch opening rang out like a gunshot in that deserted hallway. We pushed the door open and were swallowed by the familiar darkness of our room. The window was open, letting in the orange light from the street lamps, which drew long, distorted shadows over our unmade beds. I should have turned on the light. I should have walked to my side of the room, grabbed my pajamas, and locked myself in the bathroom to wash my face and my soul. But as soon as the door closed behind us with a soft, definitive click, Fabiana didn't move away. She turned to me in the dim light, and the glow in her eyes seemed to capture what little light there was in the room. "You're very quiet, Erica," she whispered, and her voice no longer had any trace of drunkenness, only a raspy seriousness that made my knees buckle. I was pressed against the wooden door, trapped between the exit and the abyss that was Fabiana. The air in the room seemed to have become solid, hard to breathe. I wanted to tell her I was quiet because I was praying mentally, asking for strength not to make a mistake, but the words died on my dry tongue. "We need to sleep, Fabi. Tomorrow." I started, but the sentence died when she took a step forward, invading the last inch of personal space I had left. She reached out and touched my face. Her palm was cold, but her fingers burned where they touched my cheek. She traced the line of my jaw with agonizing slowness, as if she were memorizing the shape of my face with her touch, since her vision was impaired by the dark. I closed my eyes, unable to hold her gaze, feeling my heart beat so hard it felt like it wanted to tear through my chest and jump into her hands. "I don't want to sleep," she confessed, her voice breaking slightly. "And I know you don't want to either. Why do you always run, Erica? What are you so afraid of?" Her question was the key that opened the last floodgate of my resistance. I was afraid of hell. I was afraid of disappointing my parents. I was afraid of losing my scholarship. But at that moment, My greatest fear was going the rest of my life without knowing the taste of her mouth. The religious guilt I carried like a cross on my back seemed insignificant before the urgency of that touch. I opened my eyes and found her staring at me with a vulnerability I had never seen in popular Fabiana. She wasn't the rich, self-assured girl at that moment. She was just a scared girl, silently asking to be seen, to be wanted. It was this glimpse of humanity that broke my defenses. I moved my trembling hand to her waist, feeling the curve of her body under the soft fabric, and pulled her slightly toward me. The movement was subtle, but it was enough. Fabiana let out a sigh that sounded like relief and ended the distance between us. When her lips touched mine, the world stopped. There were no fireworks or violin music. There was a thermal shock, a collision of planets. Her mouth was soft, urgent, and tasted like peach schnapps and danger. For the first second, I stood static, paralyzed by the shock of doing exactly what I swore never to do. But then she asked for entrance with her tongue, a moist, warm touch that swept my hesitation away. I responded to the kiss with a hunger I didn't know I possessed. My hands went to her hair, tangling in the wavy strands, pulling her closer, as if I wanted to merge our bodies into one. The kiss stopped being a timid exploration and became a desperate conversation, where tongues and teeth tried to say everything we had kept silent during those months of living together. I felt her body pressed against mine, every curve fitting perfectly, and a low moan escaped her throat, vibrating against my mouth. That sound was my end. Sainthood, morality, right and wrong. Everything dissolved in the darkness of that room. There was only Fabiana, her scent, her taste, and the absolute certainty that I was condemning myself, but that the condemnation was worth it. We pulled apart for a split second just to breathe, the air coming into our bodies like a tear. And I saw her face illuminated by the streetlight, her lips swollen and her eyes dark with desire. "Come," she whispered against my mouth, not as an order, but as a plea for help. She interlaced her fingers with mine and began to back away toward her bed, pulling me along. I went. I left my fears at the door, along with my shoes, and followed her to the darkness of the right side of the room, knowing that when the sun rose, nothing in my world would be in the same place. Her bed, with that colorful tapestry, seemed like a pagan altar waiting for our sacrifice, and I was ready to give myself over. The tapestry, which I had so often mentally criticized for collecting dust, seemed like the softest, most welcoming surface in the world when we fell onto it. A tangle of limbs, hair, and uneven breaths. The mattress springs creaked under our weight, a metallic sound that was lost among the sighs escaping our hungry mouths. At that moment, gravity seemed to have doubled its strength, keeping us glued to each other, preventing any rational thought or prayer of regret from infiltrating the small space between our bodies. Fabiana was on top of me, and her weight was the only anchor keeping me pinned to the earth while my mind floated in a haze of desire and disbelief. She pulled back millimeters from my face, propping herself on her elbows to look into my eyes in that dim light. The faint light from the street came through the window and reflected in the tears shining in her eyes. Or maybe they were in mine. I no longer knew where I ended and she began. With a gentleness that contrasted with the urgency of the previous kiss, she put her hand to my face and removed my glasses, placing them carefully on the nightstand. That simple gesture stripped me more than if she had torn off all my clothes. Without my lenses, the world became an impressionist blur, and the only clear and real thing was her face hovering over mine. "You are so beautiful, Erica," she whispered, and her voice trembled with a sincerity that made my chest ache. "I've wanted to kiss you since the day you walked into this room with that huge suitcase." Her confession was the final blow to my resistance. I raised my trembling hands to touch her face, feeling the soft skin of her cheeks and the curve of her neck, marveling at the freedom of being able to explore her without fear. My fingers moved down her shoulders, pushing the thin straps of her blouse, and her skin was feverish at my touch, reacting with visible goosebumps to every inch I traveled. The room, once a place of study and silence, transformed into a sanctuary of discovery. The clothes, which until then served as social armor, defining who was the rich girl and who was the scholarship student, who was popular and who was invisible, were discarded on the floor, becoming just piles of meaningless fabric. When her skin touched mine, without barriers, without fabric, without lies, I felt a thermal shock that made me arch my back. It was the contrast of my chronic cold with the solar heat she emanated, a fusion that seemed to rewrite the biology of my nerves. I closed my eyes and let my other senses take command. Her vanilla scent was stronger now, mixed with the natural aroma of excited skin, creating an intoxicating perfume I wanted to bottle and keep forever. I felt her hands traveling over my body with a reverence I never expected to receive, touching my scars, my protruding ribs, and my insecurities as if they were the most precious things in the world. For someone who grew up hearing that the body was a temple of the Holy Spirit and that desire was a sin, discovering that the touch of another woman could be sacred was an overwhelming revelation. "I'm afraid," I confessed in a thread of a voice, as the intimacy became too deep, too real. Fabiana stopped for a moment, kissing my forehead, my eyelids, the tip of my nose, calming the skittish animal living inside me. "I am too," she replied, resting her forehead against mine. "But I won't hurt you. Never." Her promise hung in the air, solemn, and I believed her. At that moment, I would have believed anything she said. We loved each other with the urgency of someone who knows deep down that time is short. It wasn't like in the movies or the books I read in secret. It was clumsy. It was intense. It was sweaty. And it was the most honest thing I had ever done in my life. Every touch of hers erased a verse of condemnation that had been engraved in my mind. Every kiss rewritten my story. I discovered that hell wasn't that room. Hell would be living an entire life without having felt that at least once. I gave myself over completely, letting her guide me through a labyrinth of sensations that made me forget my name, my origin, and my destiny. Time lost its meaning. I don't know if we spent minutes or hours wrapped in that cocoon of sheets and feelings. I only know that at some point, the frenzy gave way to a deep, exhausted calm. Silence reigned again in room 304. But now it wasn't an empty silence. It was a silence filled by our synchronized breathing and the slow beating of our hearts, which seemed to converse without needing words. We lay there spooning, her body molded to my back, her arm heavy over my waist, as if she wanted to ensure I wouldn't disappear. I felt her warm breath on my neck, a soft rhythm indicating she was falling asleep. I, however, stayed awake, my eyes fixed on the dark wall in front of me, feeling the sweat cool on my skin and reality beginning to crawl back into the room, coming out from under the bed where I had hidden it. The alcohol euphoria was fading, and with sobriety came the terrible clarity of what we had done. I could feel the weight of the rosary that was under my pillow in the next bed, yards away, radiating a silent accusation. My mind, once clouded by pleasure, began to be invaded by familiar voices. The voice of the priest from my town, the voice of my grandmother, the voice of my own conscience shaped by guilt. What did you do, Erica? What have you become? Fabiana sighed in her sleep and squeezed me a little tighter, murmuring something unintelligible that sounded affectionate. That gesture, which should have brought me comfort, brought me panic. I realized this wasn't just a night of adventure for her. There was affection, there was care, there was a possibility of a future, and that was exactly what terrified me. I didn't have the strength to sustain that love. I didn't have the courage to face the world, my family and myself because of her. I looked at the window and saw the sky outside beginning to change from deep black to a sad navy blue, announcing that dawn was near. The sun would rise soon, illuminating our naked bodies, exposing our sin to the light of day. Panic settled in my throat like a bitter taste of bile. I knew I couldn't look at her when she woke up. I knew I wouldn't have the strength to deny what I felt if I saw those clear eyes staring at me with love. With a bleeding heart and trembling hands, I began to disentangle myself from her embrace, moving millimeter by millimeter so as not to wake her. I was about to commit the greatest act of cowardice of my life, but in my 20-year-old scared girl's head, running away seemed like the only way to survive. The night of love was over, and Judgment Day was about to begin. The morning light invaded the room without asking permission, a white and merciless brightness that hurt my eyes as soon as the sun touched the horizon. Unlike in romantic movies, where dawn brings promises of a new beginning, for me that light served as a police interrogation spotlight, exposing every detail of my transgression. I woke up with a dry mouth and a knot in my stomach so tight it kept me from taking a deep breath. Beside me, Fabiana slept with the peace of the righteous, her hair spread across the pillow like a golden halo, and an arm thrown possessively over my waist. The sight of her, so beautiful and so peaceful, didn't bring me peace. It brought the absolute terror of someone who realizes they've just destroyed their own life. With the care of an expert disarming a bomb, I held her wrist and removed the arm that held me to the bed, feeling an immediate cold where her skin stopped touching mine. Every move I made was calculated not to make the bed frame creak, but the silence of the room amplified every sound, turning the rustle of the sheet into a deafening noise. I sat on the edge of the bed, naked and trembling, and looked at my reflection in the half-open closet mirror. The woman staring back at me had red marks on her neck and swollen lips, visible signs of the sin I would carry forever in my memory. Guilt, which had been muffled by desire during the night, returned with the force of an avalanche. The voices of my childhood, the Sunday sermons, the disappointment in my mother's eyes. All of it fell on my naked shoulders as I picked up my clothes scattered on the floor. I put on my jeans and my t-shirt with hands that shook so much it took almost a minute to button the zipper. I felt dirty, not for the act itself, which, in the depths of my soul, had been the purest thing I'd ever experienced, but for the lie I would have to live from then on if I decided to stay. I didn't have Fabiana's courage. I didn't have her freedom. I was just Erica from the country, the scholarship student who needed to be perfect so she wouldn't lose the little she had. I started throwing my things into my suitcase any which way. Expensive medical books were pressed against old shoes, clean clothes mixed with dirty ones. I wasn't packing a suitcase. I was sweeping my existence out of that place. With every object I packed, I took a quick look at the bed, praying she wouldn't wake up. If she opened her eyes, if she looked at me with that sleepy smile and called me back to bed, I knew my resolve would shatter. Because of that, cowardice was my fuel. I needed to flee before love made me stay. In the middle of my blind haste, I made the mistake that would haunt me for years. I pulled the sheet off my own bed to fold it, and in the confusion, the wooden rosary my grandmother gave me rolled onto the floor, stopping right next to the foot of the bed where Fabiana was sleeping. I stopped for a second, looking at those brown beads that represented all my faith and my protection. My hand reached out to grab it, but I pulled back. Leaving it there felt right, in a distorted way. I was leaving my faith in that room, because the Erica walking out that door no longer knew what to believe. I left the rosary there, like a silent sentinel watching over the sleep of the woman I loved, and zipped up the suitcase. I wrote 3 mental notes to leave on the desk, trying to explain the unexplainable, but no word felt fair. Sorry, I'm weak. I love you, but I hate myself. Let's pretend nothing happened. No phrase covered the size of my betrayal. In the end, I chose the cruelty of silence. It was easier for her to hate me for disappearing than to hate me for rejecting what we had. I grabbed my heavy suitcase, took one last panoramic look at room 304, recording in my memory the image of her sleeping, the gentle rise and fall of the sheet over her back, and left. The hallway was deserted. The sound of the wheels of my suitcase, which now, ironically, seemed to weigh a ton, echoed as I walked toward the elevator, but I didn't look back. Every step that took me away from her door was a stab in my chest, an acute physical pain that made me cry in silence throughout the entire trip to the lobby. I handed the key to the sleepy front desk clerk, making up a lame excuse about a family emergency, and stepped out into the cold morning air of the city. The bus station was full of people coming and going, a chaos of voices and engines that matched the storm inside my head. I bought the first ticket to my hometown, sat on a hard plastic bench, and waited. I turned off my cell phone. I took out the SIM card. I broke the small piece of plastic with my fingers until it snapped, destroying the only bridge she would have to find me. As the bus maneuvered onto the platform, I rested my forehead against the cold glass of the window and watched the gray city fall behind. I was running away to save my soul, but as the tears streamed down my face, I had the devastating certainty that I had just left my heart behind, forgotten on a wooden floor, next to an old rosary and a girl who dreamed of a love I didn't have the courage to sustain. They say time heals all wounds, but I've found that's a comforting lie people tell so they can sleep at night. Time doesn't heal. It just covers the wound with a thick layer of dust and routine, turning the acute pain into a chronic, dull throb, the kind you learn to ignore just to function in society. 20 years have passed since that morning at the bus station. 2 whole decades, 7,300 days, and there hasn't been a single dawn where I haven't thought of her smile or the vanilla scent that became ingrained in my olfactory memory like an invisible tattoo. I finished medical school at a smaller state university, far from the spotlight and temptations of the big city. I chose pathology as my specialty, an area where I dealt with slides, microscopes, and silent diagnoses, away from the human contact that terrified me so much. The cold, sterile lab became my perfect refuge. There, between the white walls and the constant hum of the air conditioning, I didn't have to pretend to be friendly, and no one asked me questions about my personal life. I became an excellent doctor, technical and precise, but a hollow woman inside. I tried to live the script my family had written for me. I married at 27 to a dentist from my town, a good man, God-fearing, who wanted children. I was the perfect wife on paper. I kept the house organized, went to church on Sundays, and smiled at family dinners. But in the intimacy of the bedroom, when he touched me, I closed my eyes and had to summon ghosts of the past to be able to respond. The marriage lasted 5 long years, sustained by inertia, until he, tired of my coldness and my distant soul, asked for a divorce. I signed the papers with a relief that bordered on indecency. I was free to be alone again, which was the only honest marital status for someone who had left their heart somewhere else. While my life moved in shades of gray, I watched Fabiana's life in technicolor through the cold screen of the computer. I followed the rise of social media like a masochistic voyeur. I saw when she graduated, beautiful and radiant in her gown. I saw the photos of her trips to Greece, to France, to places we dreamed of visiting together. And the hardest blow of all, I saw her wedding photos. He was a handsome man, elegant, with a kind smile. In the photos, they looked like the perfect couple from a magazine, the embodiment of success and full happiness. I cried for 3 days straight when I saw her wedding album on Facebook. I cried not just because I had lost her, but because of the certainty that she had moved on, that night in the dorm had been just a youthful mistake for her, while for me, it had been the only moment of truth in my life. I convinced myself she was happy, that she had found someone who could give her the public, acceptable life that I, with my cowardice and my dogmas, could never offer. I blocked her profile after that, unable to keep torturing myself with someone else's happiness, and dived headfirst into work. The following years were a blur of conferences, shifts, and lonely nights accompanied by books and red wine. I let my hair grow, stopped trying to wear contact lenses, and accepted my glasses as part of my identity. My freckles, which I hated in my youth, were still there, now accompanied by a few expression lines around my eyes, marks of someone who strained their eyes for too long trying to see tiny things in microscopes. I became Dr. Erica, the single and dedicated doctor, respected by colleagues but intimately unknown by all. My life was a calm and stagnant lake, until the email from the Medical Society arrived in my inbox 2 months ago. It was the invitation for the National Medical Congress in a major city, a huge event that would bring together various specialties in the most luxurious hotel in town. I was about to delete and ignore it, as I did every year, when my eyes swept across the list of guest speakers for the pediatrics area, and her name jumped off the screen like a neon sign: Dr. Fabiana Alenkar. My heart, which I thought had atrophied from disuse, gave a violent jolt in my chest. She would be there, in the same hotel, in the same city, breathing the same recycled air conditioning. Logic screamed that I shouldn't go. It screamed that I was 40 years old, that it was ridiculous, that she wouldn't even remember my face, and that I would only get hurt by seeing her happy with her perfect life. But for the first time in 2 decades, the voice of the girl from the dorm spoke louder than the voice of the sensible woman. A morbid curiosity and a stubborn hope took hold of me. I needed to see her. Not to talk to her, I told myself, just to see her from afar, to know if the smile was still the same, if she still tossed her hair back when she laughed. It was a closure I owed to myself, a way to prove I had moved on, that I could be in the same environment as her without falling apart. Lies, of course. All lies I told myself to justify buying the plane ticket and making the hotel reservation. I packed my suitcase with an anxiety I hadn't felt since I was 20. I chose my best clothes, sober suits, silk shirts, nothing that reminded me of the country girl in baggy t-shirts. I cut my hair, did my nails, prepared my successful woman armor. I wanted that if, by some chance of fate, our eyes crossed, she would see an equal, a strong woman, and not the coward who fled in the middle of the night. The flight was smooth, but my hands were sweaty throughout the entire journey. When the taxi stopped in front of the imposing hotel, with its golden revolving doors and bustling lobby, I felt a sense of vertigo. I was entering the lion's den again. I handed my ID to the front desk, took my participant badge, and breathed deeply, smelling the coffee and expensive perfume that permeated the atmosphere. I didn't know what fate had in store for me that weekend. I didn't know if she would be alone, if she would be accompanied, if she would recognize me, or if she would pass by me like a stranger. I only knew that after 20 years of running, I had finally stopped. I was there, standing in the middle of the lobby with my heart in my throat, waiting for the impact of a reunion that could save me or destroy me once and for all. And deep down, I hoped to be destroyed, as long as it was by her hands. The convention center lobby of the hotel seemed like a human anthill of well-tailored suits and white lab coats, buzzing with the frantic energy of hundreds of doctors exchanging business cards and experiences. I had been standing in the registration line for 20 minutes, clutching the strap of my leather bag so hard the tips of my fingers were white. The air conditioning was freezing, but I felt a bead of sweat running down my back, a purely emotional physical reaction that betrayed the cold, calculating businesswoman posture I was trying to project. When the receptionist finally handed me the plastic badge with my name printed in large letters, Dr. Erica, pathologist, I felt like I was receiving an identification tag in a morgue, not a free pass to knowledge. I clipped the badge to the lapel of my navy blue blazer, adjusted my thick-rimmed glasses, and took a deep breath, trying to silence the panic screaming for me to run back to the airport. I felt like a fraud there, an emotional imposter in the middle of rational professionals. My eyes swept the environment compulsively, jumping from face to face, searching for and fearing to find the only person who mattered in that crowd of strangers. Every brown-haired woman who passed made my heart skip a beat, only to return to its normal rhythm when I realized it wasn't her. I decided to take refuge near the coffee station, seeking some caffeine to stabilize my shaking hands. As I stirred the sugar in the paper cup, I heard a laugh. It wasn't just any laugh. It was that laugh. Raspy, expansive, it took up the space and made people around smile by osmosis. My body recognized the sound even before my brain processed the information. The plastic spoon fell from my hand, staining the white tablecloth, but I didn't care. I turned slowly, as if in slow motion, following the direction of that magnetic sound. And then, I saw her. She was standing near a huge banner about neonatal pediatrics, surrounded by a group of young residents who looked at her with admiration. Time had been a generous sculptor with Fabiana, transforming the pretty 20-year-old girl into a breathtaking woman of 39. She was different, of course. The lean body of her youth had given way to soft, voluptuous curves. She was visibly over the weight by society's cruel standards, but she carried every pound with an elegance and sensuality that left me breathless. The wrap dress she wore hugged her body like a second skin, accentuating her neckline and waist, shouting to the world that she loved herself exactly as she was. Her hair was still that showstopper, now cut in layers and illuminated by golden highlights that captured the cold lobby light and transformed it into warmth. Her skin remained tanned, a stark contrast to my office paleness, and small expression lines were drawn around her eyes when she smiled, marks of a life lived, of laughter, and perhaps worries I didn't know. She gestured as she spoke, and the shine of the gold wedding band on her left hand hit my eyes like a camera flash, a painful reminder that she belonged to another. I stood paralyzed, holding my coffee like a shield, feeling small and insignificant in my angular thinness and sober clothes. I was the straight line. She was the curve. I was the silence. She was the music. 20 years later, our dorm dynamic remained the same, and the attraction I felt, that gravitational force pulling me toward her, hadn't diminished by a single millimeter. On the contrary, seeing the mature version of her, with all her marks and imposing presence, awakened in me a desire deeper and heavier than the crush of youth. Suddenly, as if she felt the weight of my gaze burning on her skin, Fabiana stopped talking. Her smile faltered for a second, and she turned her head, ignoring the people around her, scanning the hall with an urgency that mirrored mine. It was as if an invisible wire connected us in the middle of that chaos. Her gaze passed over dozens of people, slid over the banners, over the coffee table, until it found my eyes. The world stopped. I know it's a cheap literary cliché, but there's no other way to describe what happened. The sound of conversations vanished, the noise of cups disappeared, and the hotel lobby was reduced to a tunnel vision where only the two of us existed. I saw the shock hit her face. Her clear eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and the hand holding a folder of documents moved slowly down to her side. She recognized me. Even with the glasses, even with the straight, dull hair, even with the wrinkles of bitterness I thought I carried. She knew who I was. I wanted to look away. I wanted to hide behind a pillar. I wanted to run away like I did at that bus station 2 decades ago. But my feet were leaden on the plush carpet. I was caught in the vastness of her gaze, vulnerable and exposed. And worst of all, I saw, in the depths of those eyes staring at me with astonishment, not the hatred I deserved, but a longing so deep and painful that it mirrored my own soul. She said something to the group surrounding her, dismissing them with a quick wave of her hand without ever breaking eye contact with me. I saw when she took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and took the first step in my direction. The sound of her heels on the marble floor echoed in my chest like war drums. She was coming. The woman I loved, the woman I abandoned, the woman who haunted my dreams for 7,000 nights was walking toward me. And I, Erica, the professional coward, finally understood that there was nowhere left to run. The reckoning with fate had arrived. But what happened after that look, and the secrets we discovered that night in the city, is a story that will shake everything you believe about love. The continuation of this story will be out soon, here on the channel.